Today's passage is Genesis chapter 48 verses 14 through 22. Let's read together. But Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head. Though he was the younger, and crossing his arms he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. Then he blessed Joseph and said, May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly on the earth. When Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased, so he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to him, No, my father, this one is the firstborn, put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know, he too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations. He blessed them that day and said, In your name will Israel pronounce this blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. So he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, I am about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers. And to you I give one more ridge of land than to your brothers, the ridge I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow. Amen. Today's passage describes a scene where Jacob, on his deathbed, blesses Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Through this event, I pray we will have a precious time of learning what God wants to teach us. As I meditated on this passage, I felt led to share 3 points. First, God's will is more important than human plans and traditions. Second, the source of all blessing is God. And third, this blessing is passed on to the next generation. First, God's will is more important than human plans and traditions. Let's look at how the situation unfolds in our passage. Jacob places his hands on the heads of Joseph's two sons, but a rather unusual thing happens. He crosses his hands to bless them, switching his right and left hands. This was unusual because of the ancient tradition of the birthright. The firstborn son in that society received certain privileges, a double portion of the inheritance, and the succession of his father as head of the family. Thus, he had the right to inherit the family's blessing. Of course, it wasn't just about receiving privileges. The firstborn also had duties to fulfill. This position, with its inherent privilege and duty, was the birthright. Therefore, when a father blessed the firstborn, he would do so with his right hand, which symbolized strength, power, and authority. By placing his right hand on the firstborn's head, the father was essentially saying, You are now the head of our house. The blessing of God that I have known now passes to you. It was a conferral of authority, signifying his new role. That is why Joseph very naturally placed his sons before his father, with Manasseh, the firstborn, to Jacob's right and Ephraim to his left. According to the culture and customs of the time, this was the proper arrangement. So for his father to cross his hands was truly bewildering, and Joseph speaks up. Let's look at verse 17 again. When Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased, so he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Jacob had crossed his hands, placing his left hand on the firstborn, Manasseh, and his right hand on Ephraim. Joseph, knowing Manasseh was the firstborn, tries to lift his father's hand and switch them. Can you picture this scene? Jacob is on his deathbed, his eyesight is failing, and his strength is gone. Joseph is essentially trying to guide his father's hands back to their proper places, thinking his father has made a mistake. Joseph tries to correct the position because he believed it was only natural for Manasseh, the firstborn, to receive the primary blessing. Verse 17 says that Joseph was displeased. His expectation was that Manasseh would be blessed, so when Jacob switched his hands to bless Ephraim instead, Joseph became discontented. He continues to speak to his father in verse 18. Let's read it together. Joseph said to him, No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. Joseph is pleading with his father. Manasseh is the firstborn. He is asking him to bless the firstborn as custom dictates. However, his father Jacob does not grant his request. He simply replies, I know, my son, I know. And then he puts Ephraim before Manasseh, giving him the blessing of the firstborn. Imagine what Joseph, Manasseh, and Ephraim must have been feeling in that moment. Bewildered, perhaps even resentful, a mix of many emotions. Whenever I meditate on this passage, an event from my childhood comes to mind. In Korea, we have a New Year's tradition called where we visit our elders and bow to wish them a long and healthy life. In return, the elders give an allowance called to the children. When I was a senior in high school, my family went to greet my grandfather for the new year. The extended family was there and all the children lined up to perform the bow and receive there. Since my father was the youngest son, my younger brother and I were last in line. After waiting for what felt like an eternity, it was finally our turn. We bowed, received words of blessing, and then my grandfather pulled out the long-awaited envelopes of money. He was handing them out one by one, but when he got to my brother and me, he crossed his hands and gave me the envelope in his left hand and my brother the one in his right. At the time, I was a high school senior and my brother was only in 6th grade. I thought to myself, the amounts inside must be different. He must have switched them for a reason. I took the envelope, turned around and peeked inside. Mine had 30,001. I quickly did the math and thought, this seems a little low. So, I went over to my little brother and asked in my most intimidating voice, "Hey, how much did you get?" In his innocent little voice he said, "I got 100,001. I was furious. I just couldn't understand it. I kept telling my brother, "I think he got them mixed up. You saw it, didn't you? Hey, I'm in high school and you're in elementary school. Does this make any sense? Give it to me." My mother saw us bickering and said just one thing, "This is God's will, accept it." I think of that moment every time I meditate on this passage. I can't tell you how unfair it felt. Joseph, Manasseh, and Ephraim must have felt something similar, bewilderment, confusion, and perhaps even anger. As we read, Joseph was displeased. He insisted on the rights of the firstborn, which was the natural and expected thing to do, yet he ultimately submitted to his father's will. Why? Because, as verse 20 says, Jacob put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Jacob knew that the one truly putting Ephraim ahead of Manasseh was God himself. So when his father made it clear this was no mistake, Joseph said no more. This shows us that God's choice and providence take precedence over human order and expectations. God's sovereignty must come first. In our own lives we must learn to follow God's will rather than insisting on our own rights and calculations. In the original Hebrew of verse 14, the word translated as crossing can also mean to act wisely or to act with insight. So this wasn't a mistake or a prank on Jacob's part. He crossed his hands deliberately and wisely because he understood the will of God. We all have times when we are convinced our plans must succeed, when we think, it has to be this way. We hold on to what we believe are our rights and insist on our own will, but God's ways surpass our calculations. In those moments, when it becomes clear that God's will is different from our own, we must choose to follow Him. We must seek His will and walk in it. I pray that we will all remember this truth. Second, the source of all blessing is God. In verses 15 and 16, Jacob confesses this truth in his blessing. May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may He bless these boys. Jacob is declaring that God is the one who gives every blessing. His blessing is rooted in who God is and what God does. If we look at Jacob's own story, he lived a very difficult life, yet he acknowledges that he lived entirely by God's grace, that God was always with him, and that he was under God's protection. His life was full of major ups and downs, no less turbulent than Joseph's. He fled from the anger of his brother Esau, lived as a fugitive, suffered deception from his uncle Laban, and experienced the profound sorrow of losing a son. He endured a terrible famine, and even his final journey to Egypt was not easy. But Jacob confesses that God was with him through it all. His life was not one he lived by his own strength or will, but one in which God had guided and sustained him. What about our lives? Do you believe that God is with you? For the believer, the ultimate blessing is God Himself. True blessing does not come from any person, environment, or relationship. It flows only from God who is with us. We may feel that blessings come from a certain job, business, or financial security, but ultimately the source of all blessing is God. Therefore, we must look to Him. I pray that you and I will learn to walk with God, the source of blessing, one step at a time. Third, we must remember that this blessing is meant to be passed on. It does not stop with us. It flows from one generation to the next. In verse 21, Jacob tells Joseph, "I am about to die, but God will be with you." He is essentially saying, my life is ending, but the God who was with me will now be with you. The blessing I received will now flow to you. Jacob blesses his descendants by passing on his relationship with the God he knew. God's blessing continues across generations to our children, grandchildren, and beyond. The greatest inheritance we can leave our children is faith. We must pass on this faith and allow God's blessing to flow through us to them. When I counsel people, parents often talk about preparing an inheritance for their children. I can feel their love when they say, I have to at least leave them this much. But I was once deeply moved by a different kind of inheritance. A mother had hand-copied the entire Bible. When her child got married, she presented this handwritten Bible as a wedding gift. It was as if she were saying, through this word you must also come to know the God I know. She told me she was already writing it out again, preparing it for her next child's wedding. Can you imagine how that child must have felt, receiving a Bible hand-copied by their own mother on their wedding day? What a beautiful expression of thankfulness and joy that must have been. But we know that raising children in the faith is not always easy. Some of us have young children and some have adult children who are far from God. We have children who have no faith or who have wandered away from it, and this is a heavy burden. I know a deaconess who brings a photograph of her son to every worship service. What is in her heart? It is a heart filled with prayerful expectation that one day we will worship together in this very place. She brings his photo and prays as if he were worshiping right next to her. I could feel the depth and desperation of her desire. It is the heart of a parent desperate to pass on their fervent faith, a heart that pleads, please just come back to the Lord. That, I believe, is the heart of a true spiritual parent. We have a duty to pass on this heritage of faith to our children and to the next generation. We must be parents of faith, parents who are conduits of God's blessing. I pray that you and I will become the spiritual parents God desires us to be. Dear beloved saints, let us live by a faith that follows God's will, acknowledging that His purposes are more important than our own plans and the world's customs. Let us look only to God, the source of all blessing, who is always with us. May we walk with Him one step at a time, not only enjoying the great blessings He gives us, but also becoming faithful parents who pass on that spiritual heritage to our children and the next generation. May this be our prayer and our commitment today.